Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the virtual launch of the COPE Galway 2020 Annual Report. We're delighted to have over 100 people registered with us today, and we'll endeavour to make sure that everyone has the best possible experience and gets to hear our speakers with minimal sound interruptions. Should we have any technical issues, please bear with us and we'll get back online within a few moments. And if the call drops for you, click on the meeting link again and you'll be readmitted. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You'll have noticed that we've turned off video and muted everyone as you join the call. Please keep your video off and microphone on mute. And if you're having any difficulty hearing the speakers, let us know using the chat box. The link to our annual report will be on screen at the end of the session, where you can view and download the full report and also browse our dedicated annual report website. We welcome your feedback, so please do get in touch with us after the launch with any comments that you might have. And if you tweet, be sure to let people know that you're attending by using the hashtag COPE Galway Annual Report. We have a packed schedule for the next hour. First, we will hear from COPE Galway's Chairman, Eamon Bradshaw, and our CEO, Michael Smith. We will have a brief presentation from the head of each of our homeless, domestic abuse, and senior support services. We will hear from our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Ryan, World Health Organization, who joins us from Geneva for a Q&A discussion with our CEO and service heads. And we'll finish up with some closing remarks from our CEO. So thank you again for joining us. I'd like to introduce you now to Eamon Bradshaw, Chairman of COPE Galway.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for the online launch of our annual report for 2020. We have a diverse audience with us today. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you. I'd particularly like to welcome Dr. Michael Ryan from the World Health Organization. We are grateful to you, Dr. Ryan, for supporting COPE Galway today, particularly given the breadth and demand of your work across the world, and we look forward to hearing from you shortly. COPE Galway's annual report is our opportunity to outline the wide range of work we do on behalf of the Galway community, to communicate the impact of that work, and to highlight issues and developments that need to be addressed in supporting people in the pursuit of their rights and a better quality of life. Our annual report illustrates stories of some of these people whose lives have been touched by their involvement with COPE Galway. And it is these personal stories that are the heart of our work. Our Board of Management is responsible for the overall governance and strategic direction of the organisation, and we are committed to the highest standards of governance. We use our annual report as an opportunity to demonstrate our transparency, and I am pleased to say that last year our annual report received a Good Governance Award for adherence to good governance practices. The pandemic represented the biggest single challenge to our work from 2020 and throughout the entire year. Given our three service areas, it was imperative that all our services remained operational and that we remained responsive for the many who were more adversely affected by the virus than others, namely older people, women and children experiencing domestic abuse, and individuals and families affected by homelessness. COPE Galway's response to the crisis was immediate and extensive. We reorganized our services to facilitate self-isolation for vulnerable client groups and made sure that anyone sleeping rough had a safe place to sleep. We reached out across the county to respond to the growing epidemic of domestic abuse, which was always there but became more exacerbated by lockdowns, and we opened Moella House, offering an enhanced service and 50% increased accommodation capacity to women and children fleeing domestic abuse. We activated a new helpline for older people who were told to stay at home and launched a media campaign to publicize this, along with our existing emergency phone numbers. We stepped up our meal preparation and deliveries and supported the nutritional needs of the significantly increased number of older people who remained at home during 2020. And our teams offered ongoing contact to combat increasing isolation and loneliness. All of this while implementing necessary safeguards to protect our clients, our staff, and our volunteers against the virus. Despite the challenges facing our staff and our clients throughout the crisis, COPE Galway's story of 2020 is one of responsiveness, adaptability, and resilience. But while our efforts to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 allowed us to continue to support children, young people, women, and men across our 3 services, we continue to face challenges. Globally, we are working towards immunity from COVID-19 disease. Now we need to achieve immunity from the social impacts of the pandemic. Homelessness, poverty, domestic abuse, mental ill health, and social isolation. We need to continue to work to meet the basic human rights and needs that each one of us deserves, i.e., timely access to adequate and appropriate housing, safety for women and children in a society that does not tolerate domestic abuse, and access to services that support quality, independent living in older age. COPE Galway's new strategic plan, launched in 2020, reaffirms our commitment to who we are, our values, and our approaches, and will see us continue to respond to those growing and challenging needs, but to also look at how to address issues at the earliest possible opportunity through educational and early engagement work. We will also focus on achieving the best possible impact in our work through high quality services and advocating for systemic change. We believe this will drive the development of a more realistic and sustainable funding model that supports the delivery of this strategy, which means securing adequate state funding to cover the full cost of delivering services on behalf of the state, and developing and growing sources of fundraising and earned income to finance initiatives and projects designed to make a difference to the lives of our clients. The pandemic has demonstrated the extent to which society relies on the services of the community and voluntary sector, and the integral role that COPE Galway and others play supporting our people and communities. Our government has committed to supporting the community and voluntary sector to recover and enhance its impact in the aftermath of COVID-19. And I want to call on the state funders to address the legacy of underfunding of the sector and to deliver this commitment and many other measures set out in the programme to support our sector with adequate funding levels and terms and conditions for our staff, which are equitable with those of the public sector. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I want to thank everyone who supported COPE Galway in 2020 in the delivery of our services, when the support of our community was needed more than ever. It is thanks to the enormous efforts of our staff, our volunteers, our partner agencies, our funders, our donors, the media, and the Galway public in particular, that we are able to do the work we do. I would now like to introduce Michael Smith, our new Chief Executive. Michael took up leadership of the organisation in May of this year and is someone who holds a passionate belief in people's potential and the power of community. The Board of Management and I are confident that Michael will successfully lead COPE Galway in delivering our vision for a community where every person is valued, cared for, and supported at every stage of our life. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. Thank you, Eamon. And can I just say what an honour and a privilege it has been to have joined COPE Galway and to lead such an experienced, committed and hard-working team of professionals. I joined COPE Galway in May, taking over from Jackie Horan, now Jackie Linsky, who stewarded COPE Galway as CEO for 24 years with immense passion, diligence and commitment. Her unwavering dedication to COPE Galway since 1997, and especially in 2020, has been remarkable. Jackie, without your leadership, COPE Galway would not be where it is today, and for that, we thank you. The phrase 2020 was a year like no other is fast becoming one of our most commonly used expressions of our time. COVID-19 pandemic, in crossing our entire planet, has impacted every one of us and made us realize how vulnerable and fragile we are as a human population. This impact, however, was more keenly felt by those who have already been through isolation through homelessness, domestic abuse, or at risk of older age. Our focus was on keeping people safe and on making a difference in the lives of those we work with. And during the year, we worked with 2,616 people across our 3 service areas. I'll very briefly outline our work, and then the head of each service will talk in more detail about the highlights of each service in 2020. The single biggest challenge faced by our homeless services in 2020 was to offer a safe space for all, to provide the protection of a home in an environment conducive to social distancing. Throughout 2020, all our services relating to homelessness continued to operate fully, with strict COVID-19 protocols in place to protect all. 2020 has been a particularly challenging year in terms of the rise in domestic abuse across our nation, which has also been reflected here in Galway, unfortunately. The onset of the pandemic brought about a very worrying situation for women and children experiencing domestic abuse. The sanctuary of a home was already compromised by abuse, and the lockdown measures exacerbated this even further. Our work with older people in Galway is focused entirely on supporting healthy, independent aging at home. This became a critical response throughout 2020, as the threat from COVID-19 meant that more older people than ever before were confined to their home, becoming increasingly isolated from family, friends, and their community. At the heart of COPE Galway lie core principles. These principles are informed by our organisational ethos and values: quality and professionalism, empowering people, an emphasis on strengths and abilities over weaknesses and needs, deep listening and understanding, and respecting and valuing each individual. Our staff and volunteers are the essence of the COPE Galway approach. One of understanding, respect, and response that positively impacts people's lives. The annual report highlights accounts from staff and volunteers about their work, how it changed throughout the pandemic. And these stories are characterized by resilience, perseverance, and a sense of hope. Our employees and our many volunteers, including our board of directors who support our work, are our greatest resource. Our team showed commitment above and beyond, taking on roles and tasks not normally part of their work, adapting to new ways of working and continuing to come to work every day throughout the various degrees of lockdown, even while struggling with their own anxieties and fears. Their commitment to their work is what made it possible for us to continue to deliver our essential services and to keep people safe. For this, I thank you all sincerely. COPE Galway's annual budget requirement for 2020 was approximately €7.5 million. 75% of this funding comes from our 3 state funders, the HSE, TUSLA, and the local authority. And the remaining 25% comes from a combination of fundraising and donations, grants, earned income, and service charges. We rely on the goodwill and generosity of the people of Galway. And in 2020, the Galway community helped us to raise in excess of €1.4 million towards the continued delivery of our essential services. We simply couldn't have done our work without you, and I thank you all for your support. Mar dermis an seo e COPE Galway, Caramis le chéile, agus go míle mágah as up the takeíocht go dtí seo. And now, to hear about our work on homelessness, I introduce you to Sinead Carey, head of our homeless services. Sinead joined COPE Galway in May of this year, bringing 15 years experience of working in addiction, homelessness, health and recovery services in Limerick. Sinead is a strong advocate of clients and has experience and a particular interest in trauma-informed care, peer initiatives and harm reduction. Sinead.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. I didn't realise I was still muted there. Apologies, everyone. It was a privilege to join the COPE Galway Homeless Services team in May of this year and to work alongside a committed and dedicated team with and for clients across emergency and supported temporary accommodation, independent living and transitional accommodation, prevention, resettlement and tenancy support services. 2020 was an exceptionally busy and challenging year for homeless services. Adapting our services to meet the needs of the men, women and children we work with through the difficulties of the pandemic, we were proud to support 1,157 people. As well as adults, this included 350 children supported by our families and family hub teams. Each one of the 1,157 people we worked with in 2020 represents a unique individual with their own story, their own difficulties and traumas, families and friends, hopes, dreams, strengths and skills. Stories like those so generously shared in the report by Trish and by Gavin. Trish speaks of her experience as a mother struggling with homelessness and addiction, and of the changes she made to improve her life and obtain secure housing with the support of COPE Galway. Gavin highlights the difficulties in maintaining a home and a job when challenged by poor mental health, and how with support and educational opportunities, positive change is possible. Both Trish and Gavin remind us of the strengths, bravery and resilience each and every one of the people we work with in COPE Galway has in the face of exceptionally difficult life circumstances, whether they have moved on from our services, are being supported to maintain tenancies by our resettlement team, or are currently living with us and working together with our STA teams towards move on. We are proud that despite the challenges the pandemic brought, during 2020, a total of 91 households, 48 families and 43 single people moved on to permanent long-term housing from COPE Galway's homeless services, 39 into social housing and 52 into private rented. As the country locked down, we are proud that we continue to provide homeless services, and in fact, with the support of Galway City and County Councils, the HSE and our partners extended our provision at a time when vulnerable health compromised people needed us most. Homeless services were not easy places to live in and work in what was an uncertain and difficult time, and I commend everyone for the way in which they pulled together as a community. In reflecting on the experience of COPE Galway Homeless Services, clients and staff, I am struck by the unity, dedication and courage of our people. Claire, one of our team leads in the day centre service, summed the year up well, saying, "While most of us would rather forget 2020, it has revealed our huge stores of strength and resilience and an ability to adapt and change to a degree we never thought would be asked of us. Above all else, we're still here." Thank you to all our staff, volunteers and supporters, and above all to the men and women to whom we hope to continue to provide services to throughout 2021 and beyond.
Thank you, Sinead. I would like to introduce you now to Dr. Carol Bauman, Head of our Domestic Abuse Service. And Carol is going to outline the different parts of our domestic abuse service and talk to the key milestones and achievements in 2020. Carol.
Thank you, Michael. Our domestic abuse service provides guidance and safety to women and very often to their children who are living with an abusive partner, who may be trying to leave an abuser or who may indeed have already done so. We do that in a number of ways. Firstly, we provide refuge at Moella House through 9 self-contained apartments. We provide an outreach service, meeting with women in communities throughout the city and most of the county. Sulla's Oak, our children and young people's service, supports children and young people who've been living with an abusive parent. We work with other professionals and agencies throughout Galway and indeed further afield. Our goal here is to support others in gaining a better understanding of abusive and controlling relationships. in understanding the impact of these on women and their children, and ultimately in learning how to best support women in these circumstances. We're always encouraged and indeed impressed by the appetite that we see in other professions to engage right across Galway and indeed further afield. Lastly, we engage in policy. It's simply not enough for us to deal with the crisis, the danger, the emergency. We strive to address the root causes, and therefore we devote time and energy to understanding why and how abuse happens, to informing and shaping policy that can support women and children, and to helping our community to understand the blight on all our lives that violence against women is. 2020 was an unusual year for us. In this year, we worked with in excess of 600 women. Most notably, however, here is the number of outreach appointments you'd see. At 1,104, this represents an 89% uplift on the number of appointments in the previous year. Regular watchers of our annual report may be familiar with the figure that we termed unable to accommodate. This figure would have in the past represented the numbers of women for whom refuge wasn't immediately available, really due to the poor accommodation provision we had at Waterside House. I'm delighted to say that that figure no longer features in our annual report. Since our move to Moella House in the middle of 2020, we no longer need to turn women away or find alternative accommodation. This is a significant achievement for COPE. In the early weeks of 2020, before coronavirus was something we seriously began to speak of, we had talked about the hidden global pandemic of violence against shocking numbers internationally of women who are abused on a daily basis in every corner of the world. When then the pandemic of coronavirus landed, we had the perfect storm. The media reminded us of the soaring rates of the incidence of domestic abuse, and we heard about this every day on the phone as women found themselves literally imprisoned with an abusive partner. The very necessary public health messages designed to keep us all safe, that asked us to stay home, to restrict our movements, to limit our contacts, all combined to have an unintended and unfortunate consequence. It meant that access to help, to relief for women in abusive relationships became that much harder. In April of 2020, for example, we had not one single request for refuge. That's an unheard of figure. Our funders, through the GSGBV, were generous, proactive, and highly responsive in their support, ensuring that we remained open and fully functioning despite any obstacle placed in our way through 2020. With the proactive approach from Garda Síochána and with support from local media and businesses, we were able to reach out to them in Galway to let them know that help was at hand, that support could still be accessed, and to provide innovative ways to access our service. That cooperation was crucial in our work. 2020 will be for many of us the year of the pandemic. For our domestic abuse service, however, it was also the year in which we perfected our vision. Long-term supporters of COPE Galway will know the long journey we've walked to our new home, and I'm delighted to say that in May 2020, in the middle of restrictions and lockdowns, we finally opened the door and welcomed our first resident into our new home in Moella. 2020 was also the year that we expanded our outreach service. Almost 90% of our clients access the service in this. Essentially, this means that our team can meet with women in their local communities. We provide this service safely, discreetly, privately. Solas Oak, our service for children and young people, also expanded in two very significant ways. Firstly, we extended our age limit up to 25. And secondly, we began to take our service off-site out throughout the many corners of Galway. These wonderful developments were made possible through the support of a generous benefactor, and we're so very grateful for this. I'm relieved to report also that in 2020, our service remained fully operational, fully safe, with no case of infection. This is due in no small part to the diligence and the dedication of our excellent team at Moella House, who worked with us and women in finding innovative solutions and ways to connect when our old ways no longer worked. 2021 marks 40 years of COPE Galway's domestic service. That's 4 decades of supporting women, listening to them, learning from them, and using that then to improve and develop the way we work and the ways in which we try to shape Galway to be more understanding, more supportive, more aware of the need for all of us to say that we have no tolerance for violence against women. We will move in 2021 to building a safe Galway, and we will again look to you for your support in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And now to hear about our Senior Support Service. I would like to introduce Jackie Linsky. Jackie took up her new role as head of our Senior Support Service in June, having successfully led COPE Galway as CEO for 24 years. Jackie will talk about our work supporting healthy, independent ageing at home. And after that, we will show a short video which gives a flavour of our work across all three of our services in Galway in 2020. Jackie.
Thank you, Michael. And for my part, may I wish you the very best in your new role, and I have no doubt you'll enable us all across COPE Galway to achieve even better impacts in our work. I'm now privileged to dedicate my time to an area that I am passionate about. Our work in COPE Galway Senior Support Service is focused on supporting healthy, independent ageing at home. We do this in three main areas: our meal service, community supports, and promoting positive ageing. And in 2020, we supported 856 people across this range of services. Our meal service produces and delivers tasty and nutritious food designed specifically for the dietary needs of older adults and others living with chronic illness. Our Meals for Health social enterprise has been growing and developing over the last 3 years. And in 2020, we were extremely proud of our entire team when we won the National Charity Impact Social Enterprise of the Year award. Meals can be ordered online or by phone and delivered to anywhere in Ireland. And throughout the pandemic, our meal service was responsive to any older person who needed a meal due to the shopping and restaurant restrictions during the various lockdowns. Our community support programme links in with older people living in their own homes in Galway. We offer one-to-one support, group activities, lunch clubs, and a range of befriending options. Loneliness and isolation has been a growing issue for older people, but the COVID-19 pandemic brought this to a new level, affecting so many older persons. COPE Galway were part of the local collaboration to reach out to people through the Community Call initiative, and we developed a range of responses, including a helpline, practical supports, and a suite of befriending options. COPE Galway value and appreciate the positivity of older age, and we see every day how older people contribute to their families, neighbourhoods, and communities. We also recognise that the majority of people are active, healthy, and positive in older age. But you will all be aware of the negative narrative of older age which emerged during the pandemic as being frail, vulnerable, and in need of protection. To counteract this negativity, COPE Galway, along with other local organisations, made a special effort during Positive Ageing Week in 2020 to showcase positive ageing and the enormous contribution which older people make in so many ways. We compiled and showcased profiles of people who are active in their communities and represent the majority of people in older age who are active and engaged. It was also a wonderful opportunity for children to thank their grandparents or a significant other older person in their lives. 2021 is focused on re-engaging with older people face-to-face in a safe and supportive way. Activities are beginning again. As an example, we now have an outdoor coffee morning taking place in Merview with up to 25 local people dropping in. We're starting chair yoga, and we're very glad to be able to meet older people in their own homes again. And it's timely today to mention that Positive Ageing Week is taking place again in a few weeks from September 27th to October 1st. It's not too late to think about how you might be able to recognise the older people in your lives and communities, and thank them for the amazing contributions they make. So I leave you with a simple thought which encompasses a positive and uplifting attitude and approach to aging. Thank you.
I think you'll agree that the video was worth a few minutes attempts and a few attempts it took for us to get it to work. What a wonderful video showing the breadth of our service and our impacts and some of the key achievements of 2020. And now to move on to our Q&A discussion. I have the great pleasure and honor of introducing you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Ryan, Executive Director, World Health Organization, World Health Emergencies Programme. Since completing his medical training at the National University of Ireland here in Galway, Dr. Mike Ryan has been at the forefront of managing acute risks to global health for nearly 25 years. Dr. Ryan, you are very welcome.
Thanks a million. When you say 25 years, I'm beginning to feel very old, but thank you for that introduction.
Not at all. So Dr. Ryan, we'll get straight to it. You said that throughout this pandemic that we are constantly learning how to do things better. How do we now build on the progress that we have made and not fall back into the way we were pre-pandemic in dealing with the societal issues around our areas of work?
That's the billion or trillion dollar question we're all facing, and and I see that really outlined in your annual report as well. You're really asking that question. The progress you've made and the way in which you've adapted your services, and we're all facing that question. Whether you're working in the front line of community support or at the global level, how do we find a way to a better future, a better normal, and not wind our way back? And I think your report also outlines that. We've seen terrible things in the last 2 years, but we've also seen some of the best parts of humanity, some of the most wonderful acts of human kindness, and a recognition around human dignity. I think there's a greater understanding that we face these collective threats, and unless we act and prepare and respond together and leave nobody behind, then we're all vulnerable. And I think that recognition of and I see it in your logo and in the way in which COPE speaks to that dignity and the value of every person in society, and celebrates service to others. I think Mahatma Gandhi said the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And just listening to the previous interventions by Carol and by Jackie and Sinead and others and yourself, I think COPE just really represents that. And I think we need to have that conversation at every level in our society, from the local right the way through to the global, whether we're facing the issues of social justice, issues of health justice, issues of climate justice. What society do we want as citizens going forward? And I think now is the time that we need to speak to our leaders, we need to speak to our politicians, we need to speak to global policymakers and make sure they understand the society that we want, a more caring, more giving, more tolerant society that's able to see the value in every single human being. And I know that sounds very philosophical, but that is the core of the conversation we need to have. I think I may have lost.
Ryan, touching on the ideas of social justice and health justice that you spoke of, what do you think needs to change in our approach to mental health provision to address the tsunami of mental health issues we're facing into?
Well, I think it is a huge issue, and there is a tsunami of mental health. It was there before the pandemic. The pandemic has just exposed and amplified those needs and the issue that has to be addressed. I think what's great in Ireland in particular is to see the way mental health is no longer a taboo issue, and people are speaking about mental health, and they're speaking about how we not only treat mental health as a medical condition, but how we preserve our mental health, and how we, as individuals and as communities, preserve our ability to have a healthy mental life and able to cope with the stresses that life brings. And I think we're going to have to really focus on prevention, on individual and community resilience when it comes to mental health, and on providing services in the community. And yes, we need acute psychiatric services and other things. Some people need to be admitted to psychiatric facilities, and we need a strong acute emergency mental health service. But we also need, and I think, to primarily focus on good mental health and reducing the stress that people have in their daily lives and giving people better means to cope with that. And that's going to take an investment. You can say that, but when you think about the implications of that, that requires a huge investment, for example, in juvenile mental health services. It requires a major investment. Also, if we go to the other end of the life course, a lot of older people have suffered, significant isolation, as you've outlined in your report, and how people cope with isolation, and how we as a society ensure that people don't become isolated, whatever the reason for that isolation, be it homelessness, be it domestic abuse, be it being of older age. How are we going to create and maintain a society when people have access to services and don't become isolated from the rest of the community?
Dr. Ryan, I think that one of the things touched on here this morning is the fact that those who were already marginalised have been further impacted by the pandemic. And we've talked particularly around our own areas of interest, being homelessness, people as they age, and of course my own area of interest, women affected by domestic abuse. I'm particularly interested to hear your view as to whether you think women have experienced the pandemic differently to men? And if so, whether or not you have any ideas as to what we might do as a society to achieve greater equity for women at a local and at a global level.
I think you're absolutely right. Women have experienced the pandemic in a very different way across the world to men. On the face of it, men have had poorer outcomes in terms of the medical outcomes in the pandemic, because many men have serious, men and women have underlying conditions, but we've seen the incidence and rates of those underlying conditions in men are higher, and therefore have had higher death rates. But that's not the experience of the pandemic that we've all felt. It's the social and economic consequences of the pandemic that have really predominantly landed on the shoulders of women. Be that in having to provide more domestic support at home, to care for children, to care kids not going to school, to care for sick relatives, and then not having access to work. The fact that many women are in the types of work that became subject to greater instability during the pandemic, day work, short-term work, part-time work, and all of these things. So what the pandemic did was highlight the unstable situation that many women have in societies, be it in terms of economic life or social life, and how the burden in a crisis falls back on women in many societies with no extra support for that extra burden. So there's no question in my mind that women and girls have experienced this pandemic in a much more a deeper way than men in general. We've all experienced it together, but the burden has fallen on women. And again, that is always the case. It doesn't matter what the crisis is. I'm working in emergencies across the world. Look at Afghanistan today. We're dealing with a massive crisis in Afghanistan. We're really concerned about the future of women and girls in education, about women's access to healthcare in Afghanistan, and on our female community health workers in Afghanistan that we've spent years collectively training and empowering. And now we have real concerns that they're going to lose access to the workplace. So regardless of the emergency that strikes, the fact is that in the world, women and girls bear the big burden socially and economically of these crises. And also because of the politics in this particular situation as well. So I think we really have to look at how we can provide more stability for women in society, in work, in the economy. And it's not just about we need equal pay, we need equal rights, but we also need to look at the extra burden that women bear in these situations.
Dr. Ryan, the UN Decade of Healthy Aging is a global collaboration to improve the lives of older people, their families, and the communities in which they live. And my question to you is, from a policy perspective in Ireland, what single initiative would you like to see introduced to ensure that the health and social needs of our older population are provided for?
Thanks, Jackie. This is an issue more than domestic issues, domestic abuse issues and homelessness. Our older populations have borne a huge burden in this pandemic in terms of their vulnerability to the negative outcomes of this infection. But in a sense, and you mentioned it in your very wonderful intervention about ageism and about how we think about age and how we think about older people in our society, and the value we place in aging and in the wisdom of older persons. And I think we have to go right back to that fundamentally, that you spoke about fostering the abilities of older persons, and that's central to the UN strategy, and combating ageism. They're two very big pieces. We all have to reflect, especially in Irish society right now, with the prosperity we have, with the education system we have, with all of the access to services that is there for people in our country, how much of that has been built on the shoulders of previous generations, of those generations who are now older and have contributed to a modern Irish society. And that's the same in other countries around the world. How do we value that? We've turned that around into, and the narrative around older persons is being a burden on society and a burden on families and then the cost of the system and how are we going to pay for this? And older persons feel tremendously isolated by that because they almost feel like they're a cost and they're a burden. We have to move away from that ageist approach. But also, practically speaking, we have to get back to you do it so well in COPE, back to that person-centered approach. Look at our health service. Older persons have chronic, very often complicated medical and surgical conditions, and they bounce around in the system without any ability to be able to manage that themselves, or their advocates to manage that for them, because the system isn't focused on the complexity of their medical condition. So we have to look at our health service and how we deliver healthcare. And then we need to also look at those older persons whose conditions and whose age and who need long-term care, how we're going to support people in long-term care in a way that doesn't just pack people into facilities, that takes them out of society. And then, and we saw in the pandemic, I mean, in many countries, the vast majority of mortality actually happened in long-term care facilities. And there's hundreds and thousands of people who work in long-term healthcare, and I have huge respect for them and the efforts they make. But the way in which we set our society up, that it almost warehouses older persons away from society in long-term care facilities, is not the model we need for the future. It is neither socially just, it's not just from a mental health perspective, and it's not just from a health perspective. So we really have to look at how we organize services for older age, and how we include older persons in our society. And I don't see either of those things right now anywhere in the world as being a success. And it's an existential issue for us as a global society, and I'm sure in Ireland for national policy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. It looks like we have enough time for a couple more questions. So I might just go back to you, Carol Bowman, if you don't mind.
Thanks. Dr. Ryan, I'd like to go back to one of the things that I'd mentioned in my presentation, which was the global pandemic that exists in respect of violence against women. And I think that that's something that you'd agree with. We've been fortunate in 2020 that FoodStat, our funder, identified domestic abuse as one of the issues of priority. And we were very fortunate to benefit from the support that translated in terms of our on-the-ground service delivery. Similarly, we saw much more proactive engagement from the Gardaí. What I'm interested in hearing from you is, how can we ensure that our government and our policymakers retain focus on the life-threatening issue that is domestic violence throughout the remainder of this pandemic period, and indeed thereafter?
Now, it's a core question. And again, I note, COPE's approach to safety, to shelter, to access, and to support, and that's right the way through your annual report. And just want to say congratulations on opening the Moala Centre, and this is the core of being able to sustain the provision of those services for people who've experienced domestic abuse. We saw in the pandemic that lockdowns were a public health measure, but that often put people in an even more fragile and vulnerable situation in the home, particularly, and be that abuse and violence against women, be that child abuse, be that elder abuse. All of those situations became much more risky, and it's organizations like yours that work so hard to prevent and provide service access to people. But this can't be seen as something as a sort of an extra. I think Eamon said it earlier about the non-government sector, civil society sector, is providing core services on behalf of the government. This isn't charity. This is about a government being able to decide on policy that delivers part of its service through the private sector, through the community sector. And that has to be properly funded. That funding has to be stable. This is not charity. This is not an extra in any given society. Very often, non-governmental organizations like your own are much better positioned to deliver those services cost effectively. You're in the communities, you know the services that are needed. But the government have to work in partnership to ensure that you have the funding horizons and you have adequate funding to be able to deliver those services on behalf of all of us, on behalf of all of society. And I think that's where, in many countries, we have this difficulty for civil society organizations in delivering services, constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul, constantly unstable in funding situations, even though they're providing what are core services within society. And I think we really have to look at the funding model and how that public and private partnership works between organizations like yourself and government. And I know that's the way government are moving, but I'm sure it's not fast enough or stable enough for organizations like COPE.
Dr. Ryan, I'm very encouraged to hear you say that in relation to the support of the third sector, because it certainly is a long-standing challenge for us in Ireland and no doubt in other countries. So thank you for that support. And just going back to older people and ageism, I can see from your answer to my previous question that you actually feel very passionate about this area. Maybe it's to do with the age that we're facing into jointly. However, I suppose just to tease that out a little bit, I'm just wondering if you have any specific ideas about how we could work together to address this discrimination against older people and to encourage solidarity between generations and all, I suppose, with the end goal in mind of ensuring that our older people actually feel valued in our society.
Yeah, no, that's a big journey, and yes, maybe we are facing into that situation in our own lives. But my passion for the subject may come partly from there, but it also comes from a fundamental realization that my dad died when I was quite young, and the role that my grandparents played in my life was absolutely central to anything I've become or anything I've done in my life. So I'm a direct product of a community that had older persons that had to step in and be much more part of my life than they would otherwise have been. So for me, it's not a philosophy, it's a practical life experience of the wisdom and the generosity, the value, and the central role that older persons play in our society. And we see that increasingly. Older persons are providing extra support to families as our economic model changes to having, we have two incomes in a household, kids need childcare. Childcare is expensive very often. Older persons are stepping back in to provide that care. Very often, older persons are stepping back in to support children and grandchildren in education and using their hard-won resources to do that. So older persons need to be recognized for what they're doing to support society. But in practical terms, we all need to become advocates for that, and we need to see older persons. That's what I would like to see, is to have a situation where we're seeing older persons again within our society, in leadership roles, in speaking roles, and people are not just seeing older persons on TV and in the media and in other places, always constantly seeing of older persons as vulnerable, as you said before, and this imagery about fragility and frailty and vulnerability. Yes, older persons are more likely to have underlying conditions, and some older persons require extra support. But in the main, living a healthy, long life is something that most people expect. And I think we have to find ways to highlight that, to champion that, to give voice to older persons in our society. And I'll be really pleased. I mean, we have a very, very strong healthy aging group here at WHO. We're very pleased to work with you and how we can practically do that. You've got lots of practical examples of how you do that. You're the experts more than I am in this. I just have a sense that this is an opportunity. The pandemic has offered us an opportunity to really think about those people in our society who are marginalized on the edge, and how we can create a more inclusive society in future, and a society that is more about preventing domestic abuse, preventing homelessness, providing services for mental health, valuing and having an inclusive approach to aging, and the work that COPE does and the work that's outlined in this annual report shows what a band of really committed frontline community activists can do. There's a lot of talk of global policy, and there's an awful lot of talk around global institutions, but help is generated at community level. You're the experts, you're the heroes in this, not a bunch of shiny ass bureaucrats in Geneva or New York or somewhere else. It is frontline community workers, people who get up and go out every day and serve their communities, people who see that life of service and see the value in that. And I think we really do have to reflect that it is in that is the true value of the work we all do. And anything I can do personally to help support that message and support the value of organizations like COPE, I'd be very pleased to do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. And look, it's absolutely great to hear insights from a global thought leader such as yourself, and insights that align so very closely to our own vision, a community where every person is valued, cared for and supported at every stage of life. So unfortunately, we've run out of time today. And now, just coming to the conclusion of our annual report launch, I'd like to say a few words of thanks, if I may. Thank you to all who have joined us today. Thank you to our clients and to the people who have bravely shared their stories for their inclusion in our annual report. Thank you to all who are part of delivering COPE Galway's strategy, specifically and especially our staff, our volunteers and our board of management. Thank you to all our local partners, community, voluntary and statutory. I pay tribute to the local community response here in Galway. In protecting our most vulnerable, we came together across our city and our county of Galway and figured it out. Working together, we overcame extraordinary challenges over the last 18 months. Thanks to our marketing and communications team, Colette for producing the annual report, and everybody who helped and contributed to that. And finally to Sharon and all our team for delivering this absolutely excellent online launch. Thanks to everybody who contributes to our work in so many ways. Gur míle maith agah agus slán go fóill.